All right, hello everybody. Today I'm going to be investigating NORDVPN. So let's look into NORDVPN and how it works. For us to understand how NORDVPN works, let's understand how your connection to the internet works. So I'm going to go off to my next slide here. All right, so let's say you're this person sitting on a chair here in this diagram, and you connect out to the internet. Well, as you're connecting out to the internet, your traffic is going through your internet service provider. As we all know, we pay for our internet service provider to provide us that service, of course. Okay. Now, this is great, except one thing. Let's say my internet service provider is AT&T, very large internet service provider here in the United States. And let's say the website I'm trying to access is McDonald's, because why not? This is America, after all. So as you see here, my internet traffic is going through AT&T's infrastructure, and it's going and connecting to McDonald's web server. Now the thing is, and this is the issue, there's a privacy issue here. What if the FBI reached out to AT&T and they were interested in figuring out what Danny was doing, right? What they would do is they would reach out to AT&T. They would say, hey, we would like the logs showing the connections made between this IP address and this destination IP address. Well, AT&T might just give that to them without a warrant, or they may say, hey, go out and get a warrant and come back, right? But once they have that information, they're able to see what you're doing. Now, in this case, I'm just accessing McDonald's. Not a big deal, right? But what if, example 2, instead of the FBI, it's even worse. You have business people. And the business people are trying to gather information about you so that they can better create advertisements for your needs, for your business needs, right? So they can see, hey, this person is trying to access McDonald's website. Maybe we should send more targeted ads towards them so they can eat more McDonald's until they get type 2 diabetes. Just plain. Okay, but seriously, privacy is an issue, and we can look at it two ways. One, either, I'm not doing anything bad, but what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that they're selling your information. They're starting to learn more about you. In some cases, learning more about you than you know about yourself, especially with Google. Or if you live in a country like China or Russia, law enforcement agencies might be gathering that information to see what you're doing, right? Now, what if you were accidentally visiting a website? Maybe you even visited by mistake, or you just clicked on a link. Well, now you've accessed that website. What if law enforcement's trying to figure out who's accessing that and do further investigations? Like I said, you just walked into a crime scene. Well, we want to protect our privacy. So we see these NordVPN commercials, and they're offering to protect your privacy. So let's look into that. Let's look into NordVPN here. How does NordVPN work exactly? Well, first you install the NordVPN software on your computer, and then your traffic goes from your computer out through your service provider, except this time it goes and connects to the NordVPN server. Okay. And when it initiates that connection, what happens is that NordVPN server will then log your IP address, because it has to know where to send traffic later on in the process. So it'll log your IP address and the fact you connected to their NordVPN server. Okay. And it'll log the time and the IP addresses. Now, once your computer and the NordVPN server establish these connection, they're going to create a encrypted tunnel. So all the traffic between your computer and the NordVPN server is encrypted. So as it's going through your internet service provider can't see what you're doing. Therefore, the FBI or business people cannot query your internet service provider for information, right? But they can ask NordVPN server. They could ask the NordVPN for that information, right? And we'll go into that a little bit later. Just kind of the pros and cons of having NordVPN, because I think it's important to talk about the pros and cons, rather than just doing an advertisement and showing you should get NordVPN. Well, yeah, that's great, but why should I not get it, right? And I'm telling you that. So now let's go back to this diagram. You connect out to the NordVPN server, and that NordVPN server will act as a proxy. So all the traffic that you want to send out will go through the NordVPN server out to the internet. So let's say from the NordVPN server out to McDonald's to the internet, right? In this example. Then it'll go back to the NordVPN server, right? And then it'll go to you through an encrypted tunnel from that point on. Great. You have privacy. But let's talk about what happens if, let's say, in this case, the FBI, or depending on where you live, maybe it's the FSB if you're in Russia or something, they reach out to NordVPN and they ask for the logs. Now, will NordVPN comply? Well, it's very important. If we go to NordVPN's website, they may say they will not share logs. But what we've seen with a lot of VPN service providers is that they end up sharing those logs. Sometimes they're forced to do it. So depending on where you're at, they may have the jurisdiction to request those logs, and the companies may have to do so, right? So in this case, let's say FBI reaches out to NordVPN, requests the logs. You got to remember that when you initiate that connection, the logs like documented your source IP address, your IP address, and your destination IP address, which was their NordVPN server, right? To initiate that connection, right? So let's say they start looking through those logs. Well, they can see that you accessed NordVPN server at a certain time, and then at that same time, NordVPN servers reached out, and there's a log on NordVPN server. And as well for that, they reached out to McDonald's, right? So they can see the full communication if they're able to reconstruct that. So what would I recommend you do? So you can actually use NordVPN and Tor together, if you plan on doing it that way. If you're set on getting NordVPN, I would recommend you use NordVPN and Tor together, especially if you're going to access websites that may be shady. Maybe you're in a country where it's a lot more restrictive, and a lot of people don't think about this. They think, well, you're using a VPN, you must be, what are you, selling drugs, right? Well, no. What if you're in China or Russia, and your countries are monitoring your internet connections? It may be in your best interest and for privacy to use a VPN. And maybe those countries may be blocking some basic services that a lot of us don't think about. Some of these countries, they will prevent connections out to, like, let's say, for example, and they may not be doing this, but let's say, for example, Netflix, right? Or certain websites that really anyone should have the right to access. Now, a way to circumvent that is to use a VPN. And if you want to make sure you use it and use it correctly, you may want to use, in this case, NordVPN and Tor together, right? So let's talk more about Tor and the benefits of it. And also I'll give another recommendation towards the end that you can use as well. If you don't want to use NordVPN, or maybe you just want to use Tor, or maybe you just want to use a proxy chain. We'll talk about that later. So what is Tor? So Tor is a network of interconnected circuits, okay? And these circuits are essentially nodes. And not to overcomplicate things, your computer is a node. Any one device connected to the internet that has an IP address is considered a node, okay? So let's say you're the user here and you're trying to access a server here, McDonald's. I just like to simplify things. Well, the Tor network is a network of nodes here. And essentially what your traffic does is it can go through any one of these nodes. Now, your entrance and exit nodes are the most important here, because if your entrance and exit nodes become compromised, it is possible to determine where that traffic originated from. So what Tor does is it'll send your traffic through multiple nodes. And that may confuse someone who is trying to intercept your traffic, because now your traffic has gone through multiple nodes, right? And so it's hard to trace that back to you. You could think of it like I walked into a room and there was a room full of people, right? And I told someone a secret, and I told that person to pass that secret on to the next person, and I gave the destination was Rick towards the back of the room, right? And so the next person passes the message and they say, hey, pass it to Rick. Next person passes the message and they pass it to Rick. And they pass it on until it gets to Rick eventually, right? So once it gets to Rick and he's in the back of the room, right? And I'm just using this as an example. He doesn't know where that message came from, right? Because it's gone through multiple people, and those people can maybe trace it back, right? If you if if you were to ask all those people, what would most likely happen is they would get confused midway, and you know, someone wouldn't understand what's going on, right? But your traffic is going through the entrance node, then you have this intermediate node, and then it's exiting this exit node. So, you know, during the Cold War, this was very important, and the Navy actually created Tor as far as the theory went about it. So you can think of this in military terms. If let's say this is the United States, so this is a country, right? And the Russians were able to nuke a military facility, right? And they hit that military facility, and now that military facility isn't able to communicate. Well, what if that military facility had critical communication equipment? So essentially, that would be a single point of failure. So in order to prevent a single point of failure, if you have your communications distributed amongst multiple military bases, if you destroy one military base, that's fine. The communications will fall back on another network path that would connect to another set of military bases, so that you have that constant flow of communication between your headquarters, like Washington or the Pentagon, out to these military bases, let's say Camp Pendleton, for example, right? So having circuits uh, allows you to have that, right? and you can think of it like in terms of ships, to have circuits that can communicate with one another, ships that can communicate with one another. So if one ship is hit, then the other ships can still communicate amongst one another and take different paths. So circuits were a way to fix that issue, and they're still very valuable, especially when you're looking at the Tor network and how traffic goes this path. It may go this path. It may go down, instead of going down this entrance position, it may go down this one at the bottom. So this is the entrance position. This is the intermediate position. This is the exit node, right? You may have something like that, right? Or it may go this way, right? So your communications can go through multiple paths instead of one path. So it makes it harder for anyone to trace where that communication originated from, right? So originated from this one computer out here. It's hard to trace that when it's going through 3 or 4 computers, 3 or 4 servers examples. So that's what Tor is, and Tor has become somewhat notorious in a bad way because of the dark web, and people utilize onion IP addresses for their dark web websites, right? So, you know, but on another side, Tor is great because it allows privacy. Now, I'm kind of in the middle here because on one side, yes, you allow a way for people to do criminal behaviors. On another side, you allow a greater privacy. So let's talk more about how that can be used. So you can actually use, and let me go back here, you can actually use NORDVPN and Tor together. And so if you look at their website, they'll show you how you can do that. So if you're in a country that's really restrictive, I definitely recommend you do that. If you're someone in the United States who's just looking for extra privacy, again, I recommend you look into that if you're planning to go with NordVPN. Otherwise, if you're just trying to have a general sense of privacy and not pay for NordVPN, you can always use the Tor network. Okay, and there's plenty of other YouTube videos out there that'll show you how to do that. My video is just an introduction into some issues I've seen with Tor and some of my recommendations. Okay, so a next alternative is for you to use proxy chains. So proxy chain is similar to the concept I just explained earlier with Tor, except you will specify which IP addresses you want your traffic to go through, right? So let's say this is my computer, very old one, and I want to reach the destination is McDonald's, another example here. So if I use a proxy chain, I can configure my computer to use a certain IP addresses. So it'll send the traffic to certain IP addresses, and those acting servers, it will go through those acting servers. And as it goes through them, it will eventually reach McDonald's. Again, it's harder for someone to trace back where the traffic originated from, right? So if someone was doing an investigation from this web server and they wanted to know what the source IP address was, that would trace them back to this proxy server 3. And let's say they gain access to proxy server 3 and they're able to look at the logs. Well, that would trace it back to proxy server 2, and they would have to essentially get into proxy server 2 and then look at those logs and then see that it came from the client. Okay. Or if they were able to just somehow get proxy server 1 log, that's the only one they really need, that would show that the entrance node would show that initiation, right? To show where that traffic originated from. And what you can do is you can use proxy chain, and I'll show you an example because I was just doing it within Kali Linux of how you can do that. All right, so within Kali Linux, you should have Proxychain installed by default. Now, if I take a look here, I am just going to try to access it. And so I just did sudo nano space etc proxychain, and mine's proxychain 4. You may have to figure out whether it's going to be proxychains 4.config. Way for you to figure that out is you can just open up a terminal and type locate proxychains. And you can see it'll show me where proxychains is. And there's quite a few files, but we're specifically looking for the etc proxychain.conf, right? And mine has a 4 in it, but yours may or may not have that 4. So anyhow, once you figure out where that is, you can sudo nano it, and that way you could actually edit the file. Right, so after I input my password, I can see the config file here, and by default it's set to strict train right here. And you could change it so you could have it do the random chain. I'm gonna scroll all the way down to the bottom. And here you can see I have your proxy chain list. So this is where you're gonna input your proxy chain list. And what you do is you would enter sock 4 or 5, depending on which one you want to use, say 5, and then the IP address of one of those nodes you want your traffic to go through, right? So going back to my slide here, you would put this IP address in, then you put the second proxy IP address below that, and then below that you put your third proxy IP address there too. So you can do that, or another option is to just allow the defaults. Defaults means that your traffic will automatically just go through Tor. So, and like I mentioned earlier, Tor is a bunch of circuits connected, so essentially it'll be hard to trace back, and it pretty much does the same thing as Proxychain. The only issue with Tor is if, let's say, some agency was able to compromise the entrance and exit nodes of Tor's infrastructure there, then that would allow them to trace back where that traffic came from. So because of that, people don't like to use Tor on its own. So it'd be a good idea to maybe use some proxy chains with Tor. I don't know. So that's up to you, because even if they were to figure out, if they were to compromise Tor, if you add some proxy chains in there, some IP addresses that are chained to it, then that would take them to another proxy, right? The issue with adding all these proxies though is that you're going to increase your network latency. And so you're going to notice that trying to access a website may take a few seconds. It's going to take a little bit longer. So here it's set to default to Tor, and all you need to do in order to utilize this is to start Tor and then to configure your Firefox to use Tor, right? So I thought, well, why not just show you that since I already have this up? So one sec. So first I'm going to start Tor. I'm going to type service Tor start, and I'm going to click enter. And then it's going to ask for my password. All right, so I entered my password there. And now from here, Tor is now started. So now I can open up Firefox. And I'm doing this all within Kali Linux. So if you don't know, I have a YouTube video. I show you how to set up Kali Linux, and then get connected to TryHackMe if that's something you're interested in. Highly recommend watching it. TryHackMe is free. Kali Linux is free. Everything I'm doing is free. So you go here. You go to your proxy settings. So I'm just going to go from Firefox to settings and then type proxy. And then you can see here I have localhost 8080. It's because I use burp with this, but I could just take that out, right? And now I'm going to enter SOCKS 5. I'm going to enter the IP address of of Tor, which is defaulted to 127.0.0.1, and it looks like it's on port 9050. Okay, so that's the defaults. .9050 port. Let me delete everything up here. All right, cool. So now that I have that set, what I can do is I can just click OK. And then from here, I can just exit this. So you may have to type in SOX5 127.0.0.1 9050. So I have SOX4 and 5 here. I'm just going to delete what I put in earlier. So I'm just showing you this with Tor. Now there are websites out there that will show you a list of proxies you can use. Be very careful with that because, like I mentioned earlier, with entrance and exit nodes, it's possible to determine where that traffic originated from, especially with that entrance node. So just be careful with that. In this example, I'm just showing you with Tor. Really isn't a good example. I should probably show you with some IPs in the list, but you get the idea, and that's the important part there. So I'm gonna close this out, Control X, save it, sure. Yes. Snaps. All right. So just check something here. Yeah, that looks good. All right, so there it is. I just exited that, and my Kali Linux is set up good, and Firefox is set up good. So now what I can try doing is now accessing the a website, right? Now I'm just gonna access a place that sells tacos and see if anything comes up here. So when I try accessing it, boom, it goes through, in this case, basically Tor. But if you wanted to go through a proxy chain, you could input the list of proxy chain IP addresses. But I just wanted to go to Primos here. So yeah, that's an example of using a proxy chain. I thought it'd be cool to show you and not just show you a slide on that one. But I hope you guys like this video. Please like and subscribe. I want to create these more often, and I hope this was pretty informative. All right, have a good one. Danny out.